The film opens on a bank. The door to the bank flies off its hinges as a green tornado whirls out of the building, dollar bills flying around it. The tornado heads down the street, scattering around everything from leaves to cars, when we zoom in behind it to see Antman and Wasp in pursuit. Scott, riding an ant, manages to pull ahead of the tornado and jumps onto the ground, growing to normal size. "Haven't you gotten tired of robbing banks, Whirlwind?" Scott asks. The tornado stops, revealing a man clad in green armor. "Not until it stops making me money, Antman," Whirlwind replies. Whirlwind begins to spin around again, creating a massive twister. Scott grows to prevent himself from being blown away by the winds. "Hope, you okay?" Scott asks into his earpiece. "Yeah," Hope says, "just a little breezy." Hope grows to normal size and starts shooting the tornado with her sting blasts. Meanwhile, Scott is trying to smack Whirlwind through the twister. Hope flies up and hits Whirlwind with a sting blast, pushing him out of the tornado. Scott slams Whirlwind into the ground and he's knocked unconscious. The swirling winds die down and the money Whirlwind stole falls to the floor. I'm starting the movie like this because it is insane to me that Scott, a former thief who is now a superhero, has never once, in his 3-movie history, ever stopped a robbery. Like, what a way to show how he's grown since the first movie, the former thief stopping a thief. And not only does this provide us with a fun start of movie action scene, but it also introduces Whirlwind, a fan-favorite member of Ant-Man's Rogues Gallery. Anyway, I digress. As the Department of Damage Control comes to take Whirlwind away, Scott gets a call from Cassie. "Dad," Cassie says, "come home. I want to show you something." "I'll be there soon, Peanut," Scott replies. He hangs up the phone and asks if Hope wants to come and see whatever it is Cassie wants to show him. Hope nods, and the two head off to Scott's house. Scott and Hope head home, and as soon as Scott opens the door, Cassie tackles him in a hug. Hope then notices something strange. "Cassie, did you dye your hair recently?" Hope asks. "No," Cassie replies. "Why?" "Because a bit of your hair is blonde." Scott looks at Cassie's head and indeed sees the tip of Cassie's ponytail is blonde. "Yeah, you're right," Scott says. "But because you got so tall, I didn't even notice," he says as he hugs his daughter again. "Dad, cut it out," Cassie says, but her smile shows that she enjoys it. "If you're not dyeing your hair, then how did it change color?" Hope asks. Cassie manages to separate herself from Scott. "I don't know, it just showed up one day." She then walks toward the living room. "Come on, there's something you gotta see." Scott and Hope follow Cassie to the living room, where Hank and Janet are sitting down on the couch. "I thought I heard you guys by the door," Janet says. "Scott, Hope, how's superheroing going?" "It's good," Scott replies. "I gotta say, I like going back to dealing with the small stuff. No world-ending aliens or people turning to dust." "Yeah, and it's fun catching the bad guys," Hope adds. Hank raises an eyebrow. "It seems Hope's changed quite a bit since you came into her life, Scott." "Yeah," Scott says. "I taught her how to have fun." Hope scoffs. "What? I was fun before I met you." Scott and Hank share a glance. Basically, I'm trying to make Hope's personality more similar to comic Janet, fun-loving, with a passion for superheroing. If you've ever watched Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, then you know the vibe I'm trying to go for with Wasp. And it's not like this is unprecedented. Since Ant-Man 1, Hope's been a lot more fun and jokey in the movies.
If only Cap could see you now. You can do it. You almost got it.
"Okay, everyone," Cassie says, "follow me. You're gonna love this." Cassie leads Scott, Hope, Hank, and Janet to the basement. She flicks on the lights, revealing several computers and workstations. "During the 5 years you were gone, Dad, I didn't stop trying to get you back." "Oh, Cassie," Scott begins. But he's cut off when Cassie begins rummaging through a box on the floor and pulls out a red and black bodysuit and a black eye mask. "I was gonna use this suit to go into the quantum realm to look for you. Then, once I got you out, we'd be able to fight crime together." Scott laughs. "Cassie, I thought you were joking about wanting to be a hero. I didn't know you were serious." 100% serious. Ever since you saved me from the bee guy." "The bee guy?" Jenna asks. "Long story," Scott says. "What were you saying, Cassie?" Cassie continues. "Well, ever since you saved me from the bee guy, I wanted to help people like you. I asked to be your partner."
Who did you think?
Me. Don't laugh. I'd be a great partner.
Oh, Peanut.
"But you said you wanted Hope. But I know you were just saying that because I was too young. But now I'm 16, and I think I'd be a great superhero." "I mean, that's great, Cassie," Scott says. "But as your father, I still don't know if I should be letting you go out and fight supervillains." Scott takes another look at Cassie's costume. "Did you make that yourself?" Cassie nods. "And it was a pain. stitching the Pym particles in was easily the hardest part. Hank tenses.
Did you sew those Pym particles in by hand?
Yeah, Cassie says. Hank starts to wring his hands. Sorry, I stole the Pym particles from one of your old suits.
I'm not upset that you stole my Pym particles,
Hank says.
Well, I am, but that's not the point. I'm worried about what might happen from your skin coming in contact with the Pym particles.
Everyone in the room tenses up. What do you mean? Cassie asks.
Cassie, when did your blonde hair start appearing?
Hank asks. Cassie unties her ponytail and holds her blonde hair. I don't know, maybe around halfway through sewing the suit?
Oh my god.
Hank starts pacing around the room. What's oh my god? Scott asks. Hank, what's going on with my daughter? Hank turns to Scott.
Some of the Pym particles she sewed into the suit were absorbed into her skin, causing latent genes to grow and express themselves. Since Cassie's mother is blonde, that means Cassie's hair is now starting to express the recessive genes she inherited from her.
Cassie gets excited. Ooh, I think I look pretty good as a blonde. Hank, are the Pym particles deadly? Scott asks.
They shouldn't be, but I'm not sure, since no one has been stupid enough yet to touch the Pym particles with their bare hands.
Cassie hangs her head. Scott walks over to Cassie and says, he didn't mean that. He's just worried. We all are. No, he meant it, Cassie replies. I made a dumb mistake, and I won't make it again. I'm sorry, Dad. Don't apologize to me. I'm just worried about you. Do you feel okay? Yeah, I feel fine. Then there's nothing to worry about. Scott hugs Cassie again. Oh, by the way, Cassie says, changing the subject, I've been thinking about some superhero names for me. Maybe something like Ant-Girl or Ant-Woman. Maybe Miss Ant, but that feels kind of cheesy. What about something more Wasp-themed? Hope asks. Like Hornet or Stinger? Nah, Cassie says. I like ants more than wasps. She smiles at Scott.
This is my subtle way of saying I like Cassie better as Stature than Stinger in the comics. Do you feel the subtlety?
Oh, I can feel it.
Cassie then suddenly remembers. Oh, right, there's something else I wanted to show you. Cassie dives through the box again and pulls out a small machine. Janet's eyes widen. Is that what I think it is? It's a quantum beacon, Cassie says as she puts it on the table behind her. I made it so I could find Dad in the quantum realm and bring him back. That's why I made the suit. Janet tenses. Did you go into the quantum realm? No, I could never get it to work, Cassie responds. And why are you so tense? Because shrinking without special pressurized helmets causes your mind to deteriorate. It literally makes you go insane. That's what happened to Darren, the bee guy, Scott adds. Whatever you do, you cannot shrink without a helmet. Do you understand? Guys, don't worry. I know how dangerous this stuff is. No, you don't, Scott interjects. You've never been trapped in the quantum realm or fighting against the forces of the universe. I need you to promise me that you will not move forward with any of this stuff without one of us with you. Cassie starts backing away defensively. Okay, calm down, Dad. As Cassie is backing away, she bumps into the table and falls onto the floor, and her hair gets trapped in the quantum beacon. And suddenly, the quantum beacon activates. Whoa, it's working! Cassie says as she tries tugging her hair out of the quantum beacon.
It's because of the Pym particles in your system, Hank realizes. The same reaction that turned the tips of your hair blonde is the same energy as what's causing the beacon to start.
Wait, so I have, quantum powers? Cool, Cassie exclaims as she manages to rip her hair from the beacon. Not cool, Scott cries. You could get really hurt if you're not careful with Pym particles. Dad, stop worrying, Cassie says. I know I'll be fine because you'll be there to guide me. Scott and Cassie smile at each other, but Hope breaks up the happy moment by saying, guys, the quantum beacon is still active. The quantum beacon begins to shake and vibrate on the table. All of a sudden, the beacon begins to fold in on itself, sucking everything in the room inside it. Cassie, who is closest to the beacon, is the first to be drawn toward it. Scott grabs Cassie's hand and tries to pull her away, but they keep getting drawn closer to the beacon. Hope grabs Scott's shoulders and tries to pull them away, but the beacon lets off a huge wave of energy which disorients the three of them, causing them to get sucked into the beacon. The beacon lets off another wave of energy and then deactivates, falling onto the floor with a clunk. Slowly, Hank and Janet peek their heads out from behind the doorframe and see that Scott, Hope, and Cassie have been sucked into the quantum realm. Hank, we have to go after them, Janet says.
Of course, Hank says, but we need a plan first. If I can build another version of the vehicle I used to rescue you—
There's no time, Henry, Janet yells. They don't know what's down there in the quantum realm. Scott, Hope, and Cassie fall into the quantum realm and crash onto the ground. Scott is the first one to get up. It did not look like this the last time I was here, he breathes. Hope and Cassie stand up. Hey, Cassie, Hope says. Is it just me, or has more of your hair turned blonde? Scott looks at Cassie's hair, and sure enough, the blonde hair that was previously only at the tips has spread upwards, now reaching about neck height. Yeah, you're right, Scott says. Wait, hold on, you don't have a helmet on! Oh my god, Hope cries. Cassie, how are you alive right now? Cassie shrugs. I don't know. Maybe it was those quantum powers that Grandpa Hank was talking about. Whatever it was, Scott says, I'm glad you're okay. Suddenly, a large bug-like thing flies above the three of them. Scott leads Hope and Cassie under a giant mushroom, hoping that the bug creature didn't notice them. I didn't know there was life down here, Hope exclaims. Did you? Scott shakes his head. I don't think I've ever gone this far down. Where are we? Cassie asks. I'm pretty sure we're in the quantum realm, Scott answers. Really, really far down. Cassie opens her mouth, ready to ask a billion questions, but she stops herself. She looks at the costume and mask still in her hands. You know what? I'm gonna change into this. I'll feel safer in a costume. Cassie walks to the other side of the mushroom to change into her costume. Scott briefly peeks out from under the mushroom to look for any more flying creatures. He sees none and drags Hope out. Hope, what do we do? Scott asks. Maybe we could grow out, like you did after your fight with Yellow Jacket? Hope suggests. Scott shakes his head. I don't think that's an option. I barely managed to grow to normal size that time. Actually, I'm still unsure if I lost an inch or two. Scott tries measuring himself against Hope, but she pushes his arm away. You were saying? Hope says. Right, I was only just able to come back, and we're much smaller now than I was then. But even if we could grow out, Cassie can't, and I'm not leaving Cassie. Not again. What are you guys talking about? Cassie walks over to Scott and Hope, wearing her costume. Scott sees Cassie, and his jaw falls open. Dad? Cassie asks. Is something wrong? What? No, Scott replies. It's just that you look so grown up. Scott sighs. Cassie, I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you during those 5 years. Dad, it's not your fault, Cassie says. And besides, when we get out of here, we'll be able to make up for that lost time. Scott smiles. Is mint chocolate chip ice cream still your favorite? Like there could be something better than mint chocolate chip. Scott and Cassie laugh. Then, from the corner of his eye, Scott sees a large bear-like creature lumbering towards them. Towards Cassie. Scott's smile vanishes. He looks at Hope's face and sees that she noticed the creature too. Cassie, Scott says as calmly as he can, turn around slowly and don't make any sudden moves. Cassie does what Scott said and turns around, where she comes face to face with the giant bear-like creature mere inches away from her. Cassie sees the creature and screams. And she shrinks. Cassie suddenly shrinking startles the bear thing, which sends it into a rage. Cassie? Scott cries. Cassie, where are you? Zoom in to see Cassie, the size of an ant, hyperventilating on the floor. Hope flies into the air and shoots the bear thing with a sting blast. Scott shrinks down and punches the creature, pushing it back. While Scott's tiny, he manages to spot Cassie on the floor. Hope, keep this thing busy, Scott says. I'm going to get Cassie. Hope nods and continues to shoot the bear thing as Scott shrinks down and finds Cassie. Cassie, there you are! Scott runs to hug his daughter. Dad? Cassie cries. What happened? I saw the monster, and then everything looked weird, and what's going on? I don't know, but we're going to be fine, Scott says. I just need you to calm down. We'll get out of this. Okay. Cassie stands up and tries steadying her breathing. All of a sudden, she grows to normal size again. Seeing that Cassie is okay, Scott also returns to normal, and he and Hope manage to kill the creature. As soon as the bear thing is defeated, Scott whirls around on Cassie. What the hell just happened? I don't know, Cassie replies. You don't have a suit on. How did you do that? I don't know. Guys, calm down, Hope says. This is probably a side effect of Cassie absorbing the Pym particles. We just need to be careful from now on. Hey, if I knew I'd have to go through all this crazy crap, I wouldn't have sewn the Pym particles in by hand, Cassie says defensively. I'm not mad at you, Cassie, Scott reassures her. I'm just worried. Nobody's ever had Pym particles inside them before, so we have no idea what changes are gonna happen. Speaking of changes, Hope notices, even more of Cassie's hair is blonde. Sure enough, when Scott looks, about half of Cassie's hair is now blonde like her mother. Scott chuckles. You know what? You do look pretty good as a blonde. Cassie smiles. Suddenly, a spear lands on the ground inches away from Cassie. Scott and Hope whirl around, getting into fighting positions. From the distance, 3 people emerge. A woman, a man, and someone whose head appears to be made out of goo. The woman begins speaking, but everything she's saying is unintelligible. I can't understand you, Scott says warily. Who are you? The woman sighs and gestures to the goo man. Goo man takes a glob of goo from his head and loads it into a hole in his palm. He then fires a glob of goo at Cassie, and it flies straight into her mouth. For whatever reason, Cassie swallows the goo. When the woman speaks to Cassie, she nods and turns to Scott. Dad, you have to eat the goo. What? I'm not eating some strange goo, Scott says. Especially if it comes out of someone's head. Goo man lowers his head, embarrassed. Dad, don't hurt the goo man's feelings. Just eat the goo. I'm not eating the goo, Scott insists. What if it's poisonous? Well, I ate the goo and I'm fine, Cassie rebuts. Scott wages a mental war with himself before reluctantly removing his helmet and allowing Goo Man to fire some goo into his mouth. Scott manages to swallow the goo, and the woman begins talking again. Can you understand me now? She says. Yeah, I can, Scott replies. He turns to Cassie. Why didn't you tell me that the goo makes me understand her? She told me not to, Cassie says. She said it would be funnier that way. Oh, ha ha, Scott says. Hope takes off her helmet, and the goo man shoots goo into her mouth. Scott then turns back to the woman. What do you want? My name is Princess Marie Onette, the woman says, and what I want to know is whether you're a friend or a foe. This character is my stand-in for Gentora. She can still be played by Katie O'Brien. She did a great job. Scott raises a confused eyebrow. Your name is Marionette?
What's that mean?
Goo Man asks. Oh, a marionette is... It's like a little wooden figure you put on strings, like a puppet. In a flash, the princess charges at Scott and puts her sword against his throat. Do you really think me a puppet in my own kingdom? She demands. No, Scott says. You are very capable and very deadly, and please God get that away from me. The princess scoffs and sheaths her blade. Smart choice. Scott clears his throat awkwardly. Hi. My name is Scott. This is my wife Hope, and my daughter Cassie. We kinda got lost in here, and... Hold on, the princess says. You're from the macro. The what? The world up there, the princess explains. I believe you call it Earth. Oh, yes, Scott says. We're from Earth. Wait, does that mean we're not on Earth? Cassie asks. The princess shakes her head. Our realm is separate from yours. Time and space do not work the same here as they do in the macro. Like how Dad was trapped here for 5 years, but it only felt like 5 hours, Cassie realizes. The princess turns to Scott. You've been here before? Not exactly, Scott clarifies. I've never been this far down, and right now, we're trying to get home. The princess nods. I see. Come with me. I know someone who may be able to help you. Princess Mari walks away, and Goo Man and the other guy follow her. Scott, Hope, and Cassie share a glance before following them. Cue the traveling montage music. Okay, that's enough. Eventually, the group reaches a large metropolitan city. Welcome to Homeworld, the princess announces. She leads everyone to the center of Homeworld, and along the way, Scott sees a bunch of wacky-looking creatures. Maybe we could even put a Veb cameo in there for all of you who are upset I left them out. Anyways, Princess Mari reaches the center building, a large castle. She beckons Scott, Hope, and Cassie to follow, while Goo Man and the other guys stay back. They're not allowed in. Princess Mari brings the group to a large room and shouts, Father, are you here? Just a second, another voice shouts back. The princess turns back to Scott, Hope, and Cassie. I'd like to introduce my father, Kang. Adopted father, Kang clarifies as he enters the room. Mari's biological father was killed by her brother in an attempt to seize the throne. After he was imprisoned, Mari didn't feel right taking up the mantle of queen, so she handed the crown to me. Now Mari, would you mind telling me who these people are and why they're here? They're from the macro, father, Princess Mari explains. I thought that you could maybe help them get home. This is Scott, his daughter Cassie, and his wife Hope. When the princess introduces Hope, Kang's eyes widen momentarily, but he quickly conceals the expression. Well, am I correct in assuming that Scott is the leader of your group? It takes Scott a second to realize that Kang is talking about him. Wait, me? I don't know if I'm the leader. Yes, Scott's the leader, Hope says. Thank you, Hope, Kang says. In that case, Mari, could you show Hope and Cassie to a guest room? I'd like to have a talk with Scott. Cassie moves in front of Scott. I'm staying with my father, she says. Whatever you want to say to Scott, you can say to us as well, Hope adds. Kang sighs. Very well. Mari dear, we won't be needing those guest rooms. Princess Mari nods. Alright, father. Mari turns to leave. Then, Kang snaps his fingers, and everything freezes in place. Scott, who remains unfrozen, looks around. What just happened? Kang walks up to Scott. Scott, I know you are dilated. Scott frowns. I don't know what you're talking about. You've been trapped in time before. I can tell via your temporal signature. Scott shakes his head. Sorry, I don't get all this sciencey mumbo-jumbo. If you want to talk about time stuff, Hope is much more knowledgeable. I'm sure that, during your time in stasis, you missed many moments with Cassie. Scott tenses, silent. Kang turns around and points a finger at Cassie, still frozen in time. With a flick of his finger, Kang de-ages Cassie back to her 10-year-old self, like we saw in Antman and the Wasp. This is probably what Cassie looked like the last time you saw her before getting stuck in time, Kang says. You missed so many big moments in her life. Her first crush. He flicks his finger again, and Cassie ages to about 12. Her elementary school graduation. Once again, he flicks his finger, and Cassie ages a couple years to 14. Her first kiss. Kang flicks his finger a final time, and Cassie returns to her present age. But I can give you all those moments back, Scott. You could have been with your daughter through it all. Scott manages to get the words out of his mouth and says, "You seem like the kind of guy who'd want something in return." Kang smiles.
You're astute, Scott. Allow me to tell you a story.
Kang begins to walk around the room.
I come from Earth, just like you, but the way I ended up here was via exile. I was cast out by my variants, and when they banished me here, they destroyed my means of returning home. So I've spent decades trapped in this microscopic world. But then, the strangest thing occurred. Someone else from Earth made their way down here. I wasn't sure how, but I was not about to take it for granted. Together, we managed to fix the device that allowed me to return home. I was finally going to leave this quantum realm.
So, why didn't you? Scott asks.
That is the tragic ending to this tale,
Kang continues.
My new friend, who helped me rebuild the device, decided that they wanted to remain here, so they compromised the device. And that, Scott, is where you come in. You can reclaim the device that can allow all of us to go home. Will you help me get what I want most in the world, and in return, I shall do the same for you?
Scott looks at Cassie, frozen in time. In his mind, he sees the 10-year-old Cassie, crying for him after he was lost in the quantum realm. I'll do it, he decides.
Wonderful, Kang says. And also, let's keep this between us, alright? As long as you get your family home safe, that's what matters, right? No need to tell them the details.
Scott nods. Kang smiles and snaps his fingers, unfreezing time. I feel weird, Cassie says. She looks over at where Scott is now, then back to where he was standing before Kang froze time. How'd you move so fast? It doesn't matter, Scott says, but I talked with Kang, and he says he knows how to get us home. Hope gets straight to the point. Alright, she says. What's the plan? Cut to Kang leading Scott, Hope, and Cassie to a large computer room. In front of one of the monitors is what appears to be a square human with small arms and legs.
I'd like to introduce you to MODOK,
Kang says. MODOK turns around. It's a pleasure to meet you, he yells as he sees Scott.
Darren?
Scott cries. It's the bee guy, Cassie breathes. She hides behind Scott.
I see, Kang says. You're the Scott he keeps complaining about.
MODOK then spots Cassie behind Scott.
Cassie, is that you? Look how big you've gotten!
Cassie whimpers and hugs her father, because if you were nearly killed by a man in a hornet suit with lasers as a 6-year-old, you'd probably still be afraid of him even years later. Scott hugs Cassie back, then turns to MODOK. How are you still alive?
Well, after you destroyed my suit and left me to die!
I fell into the quantum realm. Kang found me and rescued me. He gave me a new body and an even better suit than the one I had.
MODOK now serves as my head scientist,
Kang finishes.
A mechanized organism designed only for knowledge.
But his name is Darren, Scott says. MODOK snarls.
Darren is dead! I'm MODOK now!
Kang puts a hand on Scott's shoulder and directs him toward the large window that takes up an entire wall of the computer room.
Focus on the reason you're here, Scott.
Kang gestures out the window and points to a large pit in the ground.
You'll have to go through there to find the device.
What does it look like? Scott asks. Kang smiles.
You'll know it when you see it.
Scott looks at the pit again, when suddenly a blast of energy narrowly misses him, creating a smoking dent in the floor. Scott whirls around and sees MODOK seething at him, with a laser gun sticking out of his chair.
Damn it, Kang! MODOK yells. I know you redirected that shot!
MODOK readies his gun again.
But this time, I won't miss!
What happened to only for knowledge? Scott shouts. MODOK laughs maniacally.
Prepare to die, Scott!
Suddenly, MODOK flies into the wall behind him and gets knocked out. Scott turns and sees Kang with his hand outstretched.
I apologize for MODOK, Kang says. He's a bit unstable.
Scott scoffs. Huh, I could have told you that. Kang points back to the pit where his device is.
I believe it's time for you to get going.
Can Hope come with me? Scott asks. Kang nods. What about me? Cassie asks. Scott shakes his head. Cassie, we have no idea what's down there. For your own safety, stay here. Cassie pouts, but nods. She walks toward the other side of the room, as far away from MODOK, who is now waking up, as possible.
You're awake, Kang says. Get to work on monitoring the area, would you?
MODOK grumbles something about dictators and gets to work. Kang then turns to Scott and Hope.
What are you waiting for?
Scott faces Kang. Will Cassie be okay up here?
She'll be perfectly safe, Kang promises. I'll keep MODOK in check.
Alright. Scott looks at Hope and she nods. The two of them crash through the window, shrinking and flying down to the pit.
You could have used the door!
Kang yells after them. As Hope is flying down with Scott on her back, Hope asks, "What does Kang need this device for?" I don't know, Scott lies, but he said that if we get it, he can take us home with it. Then let's get this device, Hope says. Scott and Hope reach the ground, and they enter a strange energy field. What was that? Scott asks. Then, a copy of Scott appears and yells, "I know exactly what that was!" Hope looks shocked, when suddenly, copies of Hope begin to appear. Scott reaches for his earpiece. What's going on? He asks. "You've entered a probability storm," MODOK explains. "Every choice you're presented with will create copies of you, representing the choices you didn't make." Within seconds, Scott and Hope are surrounded by hundreds of themselves. Okay, Scott tries to calm himself down. We just need to find the device and get out of here. Another Scott pops up. "You know what?" the copy says. "I don't want to find the device." Other copies of Scott and Hope join in. "Me neither," they all say. "Let's stop them from getting the device," one of the Scott copies says. Then another Scott copy whispers, "I don't want to stop them." A Hope copy shoots the passive Scott copy down. "You're weak," the Hope copy says. "Let's get him!" "Do I really sound like that?" the real Hope asks. "When you get angry, it comes out a little," Scott replies. The Hope copies all charge up their sting blasts. "We have to go," Hope says. "Now!" As Scott and Hope run, more copies pop up. "No, don't go, stay here!" "MODOK!" Scott yells into his earpiece. "How do we get rid of the probability storm?" "You don't," MODOK says. "It'll pass by in a few minutes." Scott looks at the sea of copies that want to stop him and Hope from finding the device. "So we have to hold these guys off until the probability storm goes away? I don't know if we can hold them all off for a few minutes," Hope worries. "We'll have to try," Scott says. And with that, he and Hope charge at their copies. Cassie, from within the computer room, hears Scott and Hope fighting their copies through the comms. "I need you to get me down there," Cassie says. "They need my help."
Cassie,
Kang says.
if you were to go down there, it would just make the odds even worse for your parents. Your father was right. It's best if you stay here.
Cassie grumbles and begins to pace around the room, getting more and more upset as she hears Scott and Hope through the comms. Cut back to Scott and Hope, who are getting overwhelmed by the vast amount of copies. "You were right, there's too many of them," Scott yells. "Don't worry, I have a plan," Hope shouts back. Suddenly, one of her copies grows to giant size. And there goes my plan. The giant Hope copy lifts up her foot to step on the real Scott and Hope, but they manage to get out of the way. The giant Hope crushes dozens of copies. "You know, that just gave me an idea," Scott says. "Hope, you keep your giant copy distracted while I get the other copies ready." Hope realizes Scott's plan and nods. She then turns back and says, "Isn't that kind of dark? You know, leading yourself to the slaughter?" "If it makes you feel any better, I'm leading you to the slaughter as well," Scott replies. Hope rolls her eyes and flies up to the giant copy's eye level, followed by other copies of her. The giant Hope tries to swat the real Hope, but the real Hope and all her copies dodge the attack, except for one which falls to the floor. Meanwhile, Scott is getting all of the copies on the ground to chase after him. "Hope, now!" Scott yells. The real Hope shoots her giant copy with her sting blast, causing her to stumble and crush the large group of copies Scott lured into place. "Hey, be careful not to crush me!" the real Scott shouts. "I'm sorry, you look the same as all the other Scotts," Hope shouts back. "You can't tell apart your own husband? You're all my husband!" "Aw, is this your first fight as a married couple?" MODOK asks through the comms. "Not now, MODOK!" Scott and Hope say in unison. "Well, I thought you should know that the probability storm is almost past," MODOK says. "It'll be completely gone in about a minute." "I don't think I can hold her off for another minute," Hope yells as she dodges another swat from her giant copy. "I'll help," Scott says. "Wait, no!" Hope shouts, but it's too late. Scott grows to giant size, and one of his copies, well, copies him. "Oh yeah," Scott says. "I forgot about that." Scott and his giant copy grapple with each other, crashing to the floor and crushing hundreds of copies. After a quick tussle, the real Scott manages to pin his giant copy to the ground. Scott knocks down his giant copy and rushes to help Hope. Scott tackles the giant Hope copy to the ground, and the two begin to wrestle on the floor. But it's clear that Hope is a better fighter than Scott is. She pins Scott down and raises her fist, when she suddenly vanishes. Scott and Hope look around and see that all of their copies are gone. "Congrats," MODOK says. "You survived the probability storm. Now get the device and get out before you get trapped in another one." "Speaking of," Scott says, "where is this device?" Hope taps Scott on the shoulder and points into the air. The device, blown up to hundreds of times its normal size, is floating above them. "It's huge," Scott says. "How are we going to take this to Kang?" Hope asks.
You'll have to shrink it back down to its normal size, about the size of a cell phone,
Kang instructs them. Scott and Hope take out their shrinking discs and throw them at the device until it returns to normal size. "We got it," Scott says. "Bring the device back up," MODOK tells them. Scott and Hope shrink and fly out of the pit. While Scott and Hope are flying back to Kang, Scott's earpiece starts to glitch out. He then hears Janet's voice.
Scott, are you there?
Janet? Scott exclaims. Mom? Hope asks.
Scott, where are you? Is Hope okay?
Janet demands. Hope's fine, Scott says. Did you know that there were people in the quantum realm?
Yes, I did.
Janet answers quickly.
Scott, did you meet someone by the name of Kang?
Yeah, Scott says. How do you know Kang? Then it clicks in Scott's mind.
So they compromised the device.
You're who he was talking about.
Scott, listen to me. Whatever he says, you cannot trust Kang.
All of a sudden, the comm cuts off. Janet? Scott asks. Scott, what happened? Hope asks. Kang knew Janet from when she was in the quantum realm, Scott says. She's the one who compromised the device. That's why it was so big, Hope realizes. Should we still give the device to Kang? If he knows we're onto him, he might hurt Cassie, Scott points out. But Mom stopped him from getting the device for a reason, Hope rebuts. If we give it to Kang, who knows what he can do with it? Scott is silent for a second. I do, he says. Huh? I know what he can do with it. Hope stops flying, and the two of them sit down in a crevice in the side of the pit. What do you mean? Scott sighs. When we first met Kang, he froze time for everyone except me and him. He said that he knew I was trapped in time before, and he said that if I get him this device, he'll make it so that I was there for Cassie during the 5 years I was gone. Hope is stunned silent. It's just that he reminded me of how much time I missed with Cassie, and she's almost an adult now. Between prison and being trapped in the quantum realm, I missed most of my daughter's life. But Scott, would you really be willing to jeopardize all of time to spend more time with your daughter? After a second, Scott nods. I would. Cassie is everything to me. Hope is shocked. I can't believe you, Scott. I know what I did isn't right, but for Cassie, I'd do it all over again. But is this what Cassie would want? Hope asks. Scott hangs his head. I'm not sure. Hope sighs. How's this? We'll go back to Kang, get Cassie, and figure out what to do from there. Scott looks at Hope. Okay. Scott and Hope jump out of the crevice and continue flying up to Kang. When Scott and Hope reach Kang's computer room, the first thing they notice is that Cassie is chained to the wall, struggling to get out. Scott runs over to his daughter. Cassie, are you okay? He asks. I'm fine, just stuck, Cassie grunts. Scott turns to Kang. Why is my daughter chained to the wall? He demands.
Because you broke our deal, Kang says. I know about the conversation you had with Janet.
What? How? Are you a mind reader?
You left your communicators on,
Kang replies. Oh, Scott says. MODOK laughs. Ha! Rookie mistake, Scott! But you promised that Cassie would be safe, Scott shouts.
And she was, until you went against the terms of our agreement, Kang says. And since you didn't keep up your end, I no longer have to either.
I did keep up my end, Scott says as he shows the device to Kang. Kang holds out his hand, and the device floats towards him.
Thank you for your service, Antman, Kang says. MODOK, kill them.
With pleasure, MODOK replies. We had a deal, Kang, Scott shouts.
Your screams fall on deaf ears,
Kang says back.
I've killed hundreds of Antmen. You are nothing.
Don't insult my father, Cassie yells from within her chains. Kang turns to Cassie.
Now that I think about it, you'd be an even better hero than he is, given that your powers aren't reliant on technology.
Kang laughs to himself.
Perhaps you can replace your useless father in the Avengers.
My father is not useless! Cassie screams. Suddenly, she begins to grow. Her chains snap off of her as she stalks toward Kang, still growing. Scott and Hope look on in shock as Cassie, now the height of the ceiling, slams her fist down on Kang, crushing him. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Cassie wouldn't do that, she's 16. And to you, naysayers, I'd like to remind you of the time when Cassie socked Dr. Doom, who is made even more powerful by a Scarlet Witch, in the face. A stunt like this is definitely within her wheelhouse. Now, back to the story. Cassie lifts up her hand and sees that the Kang she crushed was merely an android. Suddenly, another Kang appears out of thin air and shoots Cassie with an energy blast. Cassie goes flying and slams into the back wall, going unconscious and shrinking back to normal size.
I'll admit,
Kang says.
I did not expect that.
Then, Kang is thrown into the air and falls to the ground. An old-fashioned Antman suit grows to normal size. The man takes off his helmet to reveal... Get away from my granddaughter, Hank says. Hank? Scott says. Next to Hank, Janet grows to normal as well, wearing an old Wasp suit. Scott, do you still have the portal generator? Janet asks. No, the robot Kang took it. Wait, did you say portal generator? Scott says. Janet nods. The portal generator allows Kang to travel the multiverse. Because the quantum realm is outside of time and space, that portal generator is his only way to get out. Which also means it's our only way to get out, Hope finishes. Scott looks down at the remains of the robot Kang and sees the portal generator is gone.
I believe you're looking for this,
The real Kang says, holding the portal generator in his hand. Cassie then wakes up. What happened? Cassie! Scott rushes to his daughter to make sure she's okay. Meanwhile, Kang creates a portal with the portal generator. Before walking through, he turns to MODOK.
You have a job to do,
He says.
I will do as I was programmed, MODOK says, as a mechanized organism designed only for killing.
You know, the new acronym fits better, Scott jokes.
Scott,
Hank says.
take Hope and Cassie and go after Kang.
We'll keep this guy busy, Janet adds, pointing to MODOK. MODOK laughs.
Alright, old-timers, let's go!
Old-timers, Janet says. She shrinks down and kicks MODOK back. Hank grows to giant size.
Go before the portal closes!
Cassie goes first, jumping through the portal as it begins to close. Hope follows Cassie, shrinking to ensure that she makes it through the portal. Scott readies himself and thinks back to the training he did when he first became Antman. Scott runs at the portal and shrinks through it, like he did with the keyhole in the first movie.
You may have saved him this time, Hank,
MODOK says.
but I'll get my chance. I'm going to kill Scott and prove that I'm the true successor to Hank Pym. You know what I like most about Scott, Darren?
Hank says.
He doesn't talk as much.
Hank and Janet face off against MODOK. Scott lands on the other side of the portal. He gets up and sees Kang standing adjacent to Hope and Cassie. Kang backs up and creates 3 more portals with the portal generator. Kang enters the middle portal, and from each one, a different Kang exits. The first Kang is wearing bright red armor on a red cloak. This is the Scarlet Centurion. The second Kang is wearing blue armor with violet gauntlets, known as Victor X. The final Kang isn't some fancy variant, he's just a Kang with a floating chair that has a force field on it. You know, basic Kang stuff. Scarlet Centurion turns to Victor X.
What do we do? We are obligated to help any Kangs in need,
Victor X responds.
no matter how much distaste we have for them.
The 3 Kangs ready their weapons. Scarlet Centurion takes out 2 energy swords. Victor X loads his energy blaster, and the Chair Kang charges up his force field. This doesn't look good, Scott comments. We have to go into the middle portal, Hope says. Alright, Scott says. Hope, you take on the blue guy, Blaster to Stinger. Cassie, you grow giant and— I don't know how to grow, Cassie interjects. You just did it a second ago, Scott rebuts. But I don't know how it happened, and I definitely don't know how to control it. Scott sighs. This is why I prefer suits. He turns to Cassie. Alright, Cassie, stay behind Hope and me at all times. Stay safe. We'll try and deal with these Kangs. What plan did you have in mind? Hope asks. We'll use Hank's old favorite, Scott replies. Cut to Hank and Janet fighting MODOK. Really, Henry? Janet berates as she dodges MODOK's lasers. The hit it until it's knocked out plan? Hank punches MODOK and turns to Janet.
It worked back in the war.
This isn't the 60s anymore, Henry! Janet shouts. MODOK tries to shoot Hank with a laser, but he shrinks to avoid it.
Fine, he says. We'll use one of Scott's plans.
Janet shoots MODOK with her sting blast to distract him as Hank sneaks behind and shrinks through MODOK's floating chair. Hank, from within MODOK's suit, starts pulling out wires at random. MODOK screams as his chair begins to malfunction.
Get out! Get out! This can't happen again!
Hank pulls out a large wire in MODOK's suit, and the chair immediately loses all of its power and falls to the ground, its weapons deactivated. We have to go after Scott, Hope, and Cassie, Janet says.
Do you have another one of those portal generators?
Hank asks. No, but I know how they work. Janet and Hank step over to the computer monitor as Janet begins to code another portal generator. I helped Kang rebuild his from scratch, Janet says. I can do it again. A little help? MODOK calls from the floor. Without looking, Janet shoots MODOK with a sting blast, causing him to spin on the floor in circles.
This is not helping!
We then cut back to Scott and Hope fighting the 3 Kangs. Hope is taking on Scarlet Centurion, who's blocking her sting blast with his energy swords. Scott is trying to break through Chair Kang's force field while also avoiding Victor X's energy blasts. Cassie is watching from the corner, and she realizes that, while Scott and Hope have the 3 Kangs distracted, the portals are unguarded. Cassie takes her chance and sprints for the middle portal. Cassie! Scott cries, but it's too late. Cassie jumps through the portal and disappears. Scott is then hit in the back by an energy beam and falls to the ground. Out of desperation, Scott throws a shrinking disc at Victor X. He deflects it, but it hits Chair Kang's force field, shrinking the throne and leaving that Kang weaponless. Previously, Chair Kang then jumps back through his portal, which closes behind him.
Coward!
Victor X yells. Scott punches Victor X in the face. Enraged, Victor X throws down his blaster and raises his fists, engaging Scott in a brawl. Hope, still fighting Scarlet Centurion, decides to return to normal size and hit him with bigger sting blasts, but he's still able to block all of her attacks. Cut back to Hank and Janet working on the new portal generator. Hank turns to Janet and asks,
Why didn't you ever tell me about all this stuff in the quantum realm?
Without looking away from the new portal generator, Janet replies, I wasn't ready to talk about it, Henry.
But the scientific implications of what you found could revolutionize—
Yes, because that's what you care about! Janet yells, slamming her fist onto the table. It's always about the science with you, but you never once stop to question how someone feels! Hank is silent, and Janet continues. I did horrible things down here. I helped Kang rise to power. I fixed his technology, and I almost unleashed him onto the multiverse. But whenever you asked me about the quantum realm, it was always his scientist Dr. Henry Pym, and not Hank, my husband. Silence falls upon the room again, only to be broken by MODOK. Should I leave for this, or—
Shut up!
Hank and Janet yell at the same time. Hank turns to his wife.
I'm sorry, Janet. You know I've never had good people skills. I just wish I could have done better for you and Hope.
Janet puts her hand around Hank. Well, you can still do better now. Hank nods.
So, are you okay?
Janet laughs. Yes, Hank, I'm fine now. She presses a button on the new portal generator and it lights up. Yes, it works! She turns to Hank. Let's go help our family. Can I come with you guys? MODOK asks. Hank turns around and faces MODOK.
If you talk one more time, I'm going to grow your ribcage to the size of a hot dog stand.
MODOK immediately shuts up, and Janet activates the portal. Back at where Scott and Hope are fighting Victor X and Scarlet Centurion, a portal opens, and Hank and Janet come through. Scott spots Hank and Janet and yells, Guys, Cassie went through the second portal. Go after her and make sure she's okay. Hank shakes his head.
The four of us can go after Cassie together.
Janet looks at Hank and smiles. The two of them then split up, with Hank going over to help Scott fight Victor X, while Janet assists Hope with Scarlet Centurion. This is where we get to see both generations of Antman and Wasp fighting together. One of the most requested things I've seen for the Antman characters is to see a series about Hank and Janet back in their prime. So this and the MODOK fight are my way of giving that group a little something for their efforts. Hank and Scott team up against Victor X, attacking him from in front and behind. Scott manages to pin Victor X to the ground. Victor X reaches for his energy blaster, but Hank kicks it away. Scott shrinks and punches Victor X into the air with super strength, and Hank grows and slams Victor X into the ground. Victor X is knocked out. We then cut to Hope and Janet taking on Scarlet Centurion. Janet is flying around him, blasting him with a smaller sting blast, while Hope hits him with normal-sized sting blasts up front. Scarlet Centurion manages to hit Janet in the air, sending her flying into the wall, where she returns to normal size. Scarlet Centurion raises his blades to kill Hope, when Janet throws Shrinking Disc at the energy blades. Caught off guard by his blades shrinking, Hope was able to hit Scarlet Centurion point blank with a fully charged sting blast, knocking him to the ground. Hope runs over to Janet. Mom, are you okay? She asks. I'm fine, Janet replies. I'm just not used to being in the Wasp suit after so long. She looks at Hope and smiles. I prefer when you're the one in it. Hope smiles back. Hope and Janet hear a loud crash and turn around. Scott and Hank have just incapacitated Victor X. The two of them walk over to Hope and Janet. We have to go after Cassie, Scott says immediately. Hold on, Hope says. I want to test something. She grabs Scarlet Centurion by the scruff of his shirt and throws him into the leftmost portal, which closes behind him. When Cassie entered the middle portal, it didn't close, Hope notes. But when both of these Kangs went through, their portals immediately closed behind them. I think the portals will remain open until the respective Kang goes through them again. We don't want anyone from this universe finding us, Janet says. So we should bring the blue one with us, if only to close the portal. Scott and Hank pick up Victor X, and they, plus Hope and Janet, make their way through the last remaining portal. Cut to Cassie appearing on the other side of the portal. She hears Kang speaking and quietly walks over to investigate. She turns a corner and sees Kang talking to a boy about her age.
You must listen to me, Kang,
Kang says to the boy. Stop calling me that, the boy interjects. I'm not Kang. My name is Nathaniel.
I too was Nathaniel once,
Kang says.
But then I seized my destiny and became much more, and I'm trying to help you do the same.
Kang then spots Cassie out of the corner of his eye.
Kang, do you remember those people I was talking about earlier?
He turns and faces Cassie.
She's one of them. Reach for your destiny. Kill her.
Cassie takes a step back, preparing to run for it. Nathaniel then turns to Kang. Why?
What did you say?
Kang asks. Why should I kill her? Nathaniel repeats. Kang sighs.
Because Kangs help Kangs, whether they like it or not.
Nathaniel glares at Kang. Well, I'm not a Kang, so you should get going. Kang shakes his head.
I'm disappointed in you. You could have been the strongest of us all, Nathaniel.
Kang opens a portal and disappears through it. After Kang leaves, Nathaniel turns back to Cassie. There's a quick moment of awkward silence before Cassie says, thanks for, not killing me. Yeah, no problem, Nathaniel replies. I'm not gonna kill someone just because my future self told me to. Okay, well, I'm Cassie.
I know, Nathaniel says. After a quick second, Nathaniel hastily adds, not in a weird way. I mean, it's not like I was watching you or anything. Kang just told me to expect a Cassie Lang. I was also told there'd be a Scott Lang and a Hope Van Dyne. Where are they? They're still fighting other Kangs. I wasn't really doing anything, so I snuck through the portal to try and find Kang. Which, now that I think about it, probably wasn't the best move, considering I can't control my powers. What powers? Nathaniel asks. Oh, I can grow and shrink like my dad and stepmom, but I don't need a suit to do it. The problem is, I don't know how to activate it. It just happens. Well, when have your powers activated before? Nathaniel asks. The first time was when I saw some weird giant bear thing, and I shrank. And then, when Kang was insulting my dad, I grew. Nathaniel thinks to himself for a second. It sounds to me like your powers are tied to your emotions, he says. Fear causes you to shrink, and anger makes you grow. You know, I think you're right, Cassie says. But I can't help my dad as a superhero if my emotions activate my powers. Well, I could teach you how to control your powers, Nathaniel offers. Can you even do that? Cassie asks. Nathaniel smirks. I'm from the 40th century. Technology for me is like magic to you. I knew how to control every part of the human mind by the time I was 10. Cassie suddenly hears Scott, Hope, Hank, and Janet coming through the portal. Scott is shouting Cassie's name. Oh God, Cassie whispers. My dad's gonna freak out when he sees you. Why? Nathaniel asks. It's not like we're dating or anything. Cassie's face immediately goes red. No, it's not like that. It's just that you're a Kang and we're... Nathaniel looks away dejectedly. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to insult you. It's just that, well, I'm a Lang and you're a Kang. Technically I'm a Richards, Nathaniel corrects. Kang is my future self's title. As Scott's voice gets closer, Cassie tells Nathaniel to step back. Let me try and explain a bit first, then you can come out. Cassie enters the room and is immediately spotted by Scott. Cassie! He cries, and he rushes to hug her. What were you thinking going through that portal? You could have ended up in space, or surrounded by giant monsters! I'm sorry, Dad, Cassie says. I just didn't want Kang to get away. Speaking of, where is Kang? Janet asks. He already left, Cassie replies. Wait, you saw Kang? Scott says. Did he see you? Cassie nods. Not that I'm not grateful, Hank says. But how are you not dead? Well, Kang wanted to kill me, but someone else stopped him. He saved my life. Who? Scott asks. That's when Nathaniel walks into the hallway. Hank immediately trains Victor X's energy blaster on Nathaniel. That's a Kang, isn't it? Wait, don't shoot! Cassie shouts, stepping in front of Nathaniel. Nathaniel is a good Kang! Janet readies her sting blasts. There are no good Kangs. No, you just haven't gotten to know him yet, Cassie says. Have you? Hope asks. Cassie, Nathaniel says. Thank you for trying to protect me, but I should talk for myself. I don't want you getting in trouble on my behalf. Nathaniel steps up and stares down Scott, Hope, Hank, and Janet. It's true that I am a younger version of Kang, but that doesn't mean I'm destined to be a conqueror. I'm fighting my destiny. You don't have to trust me, but there's something you should know before you go. Only I know where the Kang you're looking for went. Without me, you'll be searching universes for decades before finding the one he's in, and by then, it'll be too late. Nathaniel continues. Also, you'll need all the help you can get against a Kang as powerful as this one, and that includes Cassie mastering her powers, and only I can get her there. I can teach Cassie just fine, Scott says. I taught Scott, I can teach Cassie, Hank says. No, you can't, Nathaniel rebuts, because Cassie's powers are dictated by her emotions, something both of you are notoriously bad at controlling. Scott's lack of control is actually what gets him killed by Jack of Hearts. The room goes silent. I die? Scott breathes. In one timeline, Nathaniel confirms, and Cassie is killed soon after in the Children's Crusade. Cassie looks at Nathaniel, horrified, and Nathaniel solemnly nods. Was that a threat? Scott asks warily. A promise, Nathaniel says. I can ensure that timeline doesn't come to pass, but you'll need to take me with you. Scott thinks to himself. After a few seconds, he says, I still don't trust you. Dad, Cassie says, I was here, alone, in front of Kang and Nathaniel. If Nathaniel really was evil, he had the opportunity to kill me already. No one would have stopped him. The fact that he didn't means you can trust him. Scott finally concedes. Okay, you saved my daughter's life. You can come with us. Thank you, Nathaniel says. Now I'm gonna get changed. Wait, like, right here? Scott asks. Nathaniel laughs. Not that kind of getting changed. Watch. Nathaniel closes his eyes and a gray and red Iron Man suit surrounds him. He dons the suit and says, I modeled the armor after Iron Man because I want to be a hero like Tony Stark was. Scott scoffs. Okay, Iron Lad. This character is the reason I rewrote Quantumania, why I've written this 66-page script, why I've dedicated months of my life to this video series, and why I've driven myself insane doing a butt ton of research on different Kang variants, the Ant-Man family, etc. How is Iron Lad not in this movie? Literally every part of this movie screams Iron Lad. Iron Lad, aka Nathaniel Richards, is a younger variant of Kang. And guess who the main villain of the movie is? Kang! Iron Lad and Cassie Lang were an item in the comics. And would you look at that? Cassie Lang is also introduced as a hero in this movie. The MCU is building up to the Young Avengers. Well, guess who started the Young Avengers in the comics? Iron freaking Lad! This movie even involves the Quantum Realm, which, as seen in Endgame, can cross through different timelines, so there is no excuse for Iron Lad not appearing in this film! Whew, that felt good. I really need to get that off my chest. Anyways, Nathaniel walks over to Janet and checks out the portal generator she made. Not bad, it'll do his job well. Nathaniel types in the multiversal coordinates, then creates the portal. He hands the portal generator back to Janet. Go in last, he tells her. The portal will close behind you. Janet nods. Nathaniel walks toward the portal, but Scott stops him. How do we know you're not gonna ambush us once you're on the other side? Nathaniel steps back. You're welcome to go first. Scott shakes his head. We'll go through together. Nathaniel looks at Cassie and shrugs, and Cassie giggles. Scott and Nathaniel jump through the portal, followed by Cassie, Hope, Hank, and Janet. The group exits the portal and lands in what appears to be New York City. What's Kang doing in New York? Scott asks. This isn't your New York, Nathaniel replies. It's one of an alternate universe. Also, Kang isn't here. What? Scott says. Then why'd you bring us here? There's one more piece of technology I need to fully complete my armor, Nathaniel says, and I can only get it in this universe. You could have told us, Scott begins, but he's cut off when a figure flies above and lands in front of them. Iron Man? Scott breathes. You're alive? Yeah, Iron Man says. He takes off his helmet to reveal Scott Lang. I can only get the piece I need from this universe because this is the only universe where Scott Lang is Iron Man, Nathaniel explains. Also, this could be a good place to train Cassie. Hank takes off his helmet. Scott? You're Iron Man? Hank? Iron Man Scott says. He blasts Hank with a repulsor beam, and Hank falls to the floor. Janet immediately readies for sting blasts. Why did you do that? She demands. It's because of him that we're in this mess! Iron Man Scott shouts, pointing to Hank. What mess? Hope asks. Ultron! Iron Man Scott replies. Hank created Ultron, and he's turned the world into a dictatorship! That's wrong, Hank says as he gets back up. Tony Stark created Ultron. Tony Stark tried to stop you from making Ultron, Iron Man Scott rebuts. But of course, the great Hank Pym knew better. Oh yeah? Where's this world's Tony Stark? Hank says. I want to give him a piece of my mind, and maybe a piece of my fist while I'm at it. Iron Man Scott hangs his head. Tony is dead, he says. He was killed by Ultron. After his death, I was entrusted with the Iron Man armor to avenge him. Everyone is silent. Our Scott then turns to Nathaniel. Why in the world did you think an Earth ruled by Ultron would be a good place to train Cassie? Well, as long as you don't piss off Ultron, it's a great place to train, Nathaniel replies. Iron Man Scott scoffs. Yeah, there is no way you guys aren't pissing off Ultron. He gestures to Nathaniel. He looks like Iron Man. He points to our Scott. You look like me. He glares at Hank. And you're, well, you. You're all wanted by Ultron. Our Scott glares at Nathaniel. Alright, Nathaniel says. We won't train Cassie here, but I still need a piece of Stark tech before we go. And what makes you think I'm gonna give you this piece of Stark tech? Iron Man Scott asks. Nathaniel takes out a small vial filled with an oozing gray substance. Because I'm willing to trade for it. Iron Man Scott gasps. Is that what I think it is? Nathaniel nods. Wait, what is it? R. Scott asks. You don't want to know, Nathaniel replies. He then turns back to Iron Man Scott. It goes by Exelon, and it's only a small portion, but more than what you need. And I'll give it to you in exchange for a certain piece of technology. What do you want? Iron Man Scott asks. Nathaniel points to Iron Man Scott's chest. I want the purple energy core inside your arc reactor. Without hesitation, Iron Man Scott opens up his arc reactor and takes out a small purple chip. He hands it to Nathaniel, and Nathaniel gives him the piece of Exelon. Iron Man Scott takes a step back and puts his helmet back on. Reed, I think I have a way to beat Ultron. Meet me in New Adelan. He flies into the air and disappears. That might have been the most fanfiction-y sentence I have ever said in my entire life, but we're gonna go with it.
Nathaniel inputs the purple chip into his armor, and his energy accents turn from blue to orange. Alright, let's go, he says. That's it? Scott asks. We came here to get some little chip? It's more powerful than you realize, Nathaniel says while programming new multiversal coordinates into the portal generator, and it's a piece of technology that Kang doesn't have. He opens a new portal, and everyone hops through. The portal takes the group to an oasis tucked away inside a massive desert. This Earth will be a good place for Cassie to train, but we have to work fast. We don't have much time to stop Kang. Let me guess, Scott says. This world is ruled by Thanos. Actually, there are no sapient beings on this planet, Nathaniel replies. It's practically uninhabited. He then turns to Cassie. You ready to get to work? Cassie nods. Nathaniel grabs Cassie's hand and leads her into the forested area of the oasis. Scott starts to follow them, but Hope stops him. Let me watch them, she suggests. They won't get any work done with you hovering over them. I wouldn't hover, Scott says. Scott, I'm the one with wings, and you'd be hovering more than I ever could, Hope rebuts. Scott sighs. Fine. Hope heads off after Nathaniel and Cassie. Hank walks over to Scott and says, You know, I've seen that look in Cassie's eyes before with Hope. I think she has a crush on Nathaniel. Scott groans. Ugh, it couldn't have been one of her classmates, huh? She just had to get a crush on the teenage variant of a multiversal conqueror. Cut to Nathaniel and Cassie standing together in a small clearing. Hope walks up to them and says, I'm just watching. Pretend like I'm not here. Did my dad make you come watch us? Cassie asks. I actually came to watch so that he wouldn't, Hope replies. Plus, I'm curious to see how your powers work. Well, let's get started then, Nathaniel says. He uses some of the nanotech in his suit to create a small orb about the size of a baseball. This orb by design can generate nearly any frequency, and certain frequencies correspond to emotions in the human body. He starts tapping the orb in different places. If my theory about your powers is correct, then playing this frequency should make you shrink. He presses down on the orb, and Cassie shrinks down to the size of an ant. You were right, Cassie says. Now, how do I grow back? That frequency invoked the flight part of your fight or flight response, Nathaniel explains. So to return to normal, you just have to steady your heart rate. How do I do that? Cassie asks. Nathaniel bends down and puts his hand on the ground. Hop onto my hand, he says. Cassie gets on, and Nathaniel puts Cassie against his heart. Listen to my heartbeat. Nathaniel scans Cassie to check on her progress. It looks like your heart rate is going faster, he says, confused. Hope laughs. Cassie, her face red, apologizes and tries to calm herself down. After a few seconds, she returns to normal size. Alright, Nathaniel says. Whenever your brain plays back that frequency, it'll activate the fear response in your brain, and you'll shrink down. Now, let's try the other way. He taps on the orb a few more times, then presses down on it, and Cassie immediately grows. This is awesome! Cassie exclaims. Scott, who is waiting with Hank and Janet outside the oasis, sees Cassie's head from above the canopy. Looks like things are going well, he notes. Back in the clearing, Nathaniel flies up to Cassie's eye level and tells her to steady her heart rate once again. Cassie does so and shrinks back to her normal height. You know, it's really hard to hear those frequencies, Cassie says. Is there a way to make them louder? Making them louder won't do anything, Nathaniel says. While our brains still register the sound, our ears can't hear frequencies this low. But what I can do is assign an audible note to both frequencies. That way, you can just think of the note and get the effect you want. Nathaniel plays the fear frequency alongside a high-pitched note from the orb that sounds like it came from a flute. Cassie immediately shrinks, then steadies her heart rate and returns to normal. Your brain should now associate that specific sound with the fear frequency. He does the same with the anger frequency, playing a long, deep note from the likes of a tuba. Cassie grows and returns to normal. You know, I'm very surprised that you mastered returning to your equilibrium so quickly, Nathaniel comments. I thought it would have taken at least a few more tries. What can I say? Cassie says nonchalantly. I'm full of surprises. Speaking of surprises, Hope says, Cassie, look at your hair! Nathaniel creates a mirror out of his suit for Cassie to look through, and she notices that all of her hair is blonde. You know, Nathaniel says, I think you look better as a blonde. I know, right? Cassie agrees. Nathaniel takes a step closer to Cassie. They stare into each other's eyes for a second before no you don't, Hope says, splitting them up. Sorry, but if you guys kissed under my watch, Scott would probably divorce me. Now, come on, let's get back to everyone else. Hope leads Nathaniel and Cassie back out to Scott, Hank, and Janet.
So how'd training go? Hank asks.
It was great, Cassie replies. I think I mastered my powers. Hank smiles.
That's amazing!
Hank hugs Cassie and looks over at Janet. Janet smiles and nods. I don't know if you've mastered your powers per se, Nathaniel says, but you've definitely learned to control them quite quickly. Not mastered my ass, Scott says. I saw you above the treetops. That was incredible! Suddenly, the ground begins to shake, and 4 monstrous creatures emerge from the earth. What the hell are those things? Hope says. I thought you said this planet was uninhabited, Scott yells at Nathaniel. I said there were no sapient beings, he replies as he grabs the portal generator from Janet. There are still animals. Scott points to one of the massive creatures, which resembles an alien monster from a horror film.
You call that an animal? Whatever they are, they'll kill all of us before I can input the new coordinates, Nathaniel says. I need you to keep them at bay for a bit. Scott, Hope, Hank, Janet, and Cassie get into fighting positions. One of the monsters rushes at them with super speed. Its claws nearly slice off Janet's head, but she shrinks to avoid it just in time. Another monster lunges at Cassie, and she shrinks as well, jumping up and hitting the monster with her small super strength. The monster falls back, and she returns to normal size. Way to go, Cassie! Scott shouts. Cassie looks at Scott and grins, and the monster she knocked back gets up again. It charges for Cassie. Cassie, look out! Scott yells. Cassie turns and sees the monster charging at her, but is blasted back by an energy beam. Scott looks over and sees that Nathaniel blasted the monster back with his unibeam. What's taking so long with the coordinates? Janet asks. Kang's blocking off the world he's on, so I'm trying to bypass his temporal barrier, which is really hard without time travel technology. Scott grows in order to fight the monsters more easily. He grapples one to the ground, but it pushes him off. Scott kicks the monster in the face, then returns to normal size to avoid getting sliced by its claws. I got it to work, Nathaniel exclaims. Let's go.
Hold on, Cassie says. I want to beat these things first. Cassie closes her eyes and grows, reaching about 150 feet tall. Scott's jaw falls open. Whoops, Cassie says. I may have overdone it. She steps on the monsters, crushing them, then returns to normal size. I'm gonna have to work on that, she says sheepishly. Cassie, are you alright? Scott asks. Yeah, I'm fine, Cassie says. I just grew a little more than I intended. That's crazy, Scott says. I can't even grow to half that size without passing out. Nathaniel opens the portal and turns to Scott. That's because the quantum energy inside Cassie's body allows her to grow and shrink more than you can. For her, the square cube law is more like the square and a quarter law. What's the square cube law? Scott asks. Hank explains.
The square cube law says that when an object gets bigger, its volume multiplies by the square of the number, while its mass multiplies by the cube of the number, and vice versa for when something gets smaller. It's why you get slower as you get bigger. Cassie doesn't have this problem because of the pin particles she absorbed.
Scott can learn about the square cube law later, Nathaniel says. We have a big fight ahead of us. Hope, Cassie, Hank, and Janet head through the portal. Before Scott goes in, he turns to Nathaniel. Thanks, he says, for saving my daughter again. Maybe you're not so bad after all. Nathaniel smiles. Thanks, Scott, he says. Being not so bad is a good first step toward being a hero. He and Scott enter the portal together. Scott and Nathaniel exit the portal in San Francisco. Wait, we're home? Scott asks. Guys, over here, Hope calls. Scott and Nathaniel head to where everyone else is, and they see Kang hovering over an army of Kang androids.
Is this really your plan? Kang asks. To charge headfirst to your deaths under the delusional assumption that you can stop me.
He turns to Nathaniel.
Look at the facts. I outnumber you 200 to 1. There's no way you can win. Join me, Kang, and I can make you more powerful than you could ever dream.
My name is Nathaniel Richards, Nathaniel shouts. He looks at Scott before facing Kang once more. But you can call me Iron Lad. Kang glares at Nathaniel.
Very well, Iron Lad. You've made your choice. I hope you're prepared to die by it.
Kang points his finger, and the hundreds of Kang androids spring to life, charging at our heroes. You guys deal with the androids, Scott says. Hope and I will go after Kang. But Dad, Cassie begins. No time to argue, Scott says. You can grow the biggest out of all of us, so you'll have the best chance of taking down the most androids. He kisses Cassie on the forehead. I know you can do this. Scott and Hope shrink down, and he grabs onto Hope's hands. Scott and Hope fly away as the others face down the android army. Hank grows to about 20 feet tall, Cassie grows to 50 feet, Janet shrinks down, and she and Nathaniel fly into the air. The Kang androids shoot at the heroes with energy blasts. Cassie and Hank are able to tank the energy blasts as they crush hordes of androids. Janet dodges the energy blast in her shrunken form and shoots the android with her sting blasts. And Nathaniel blocks the android's energy blast with repulsor blasts of his own. Cut to Scott and Hope flying above the battle. I don't like this plan, Hope says. Do you have a better one? Cause I'm all ears, Scott replies. Hope shakes her head. They get behind Kang, who's floating slightly off the ground. Scott grows to normal size, and Kang turns around.
Hello, Scott, Kang says. I assume Hope is nearby.
Nope, Scott replies. It's just you and me, and only one of us is getting out of this. Kang shoots an energy blast at Scott, but he shrinks and dodges it. Scott jump taps Kang, then returns to normal size. Kang shoots another energy blast, but Scott grows and it passes under him. Scott slams his fist down on Kang, but he erects a force field to block the hit. Scott jumps back and throws a shrinking disc at the force field, shrinking it down.
I hate those discs,
Kang grumbles. Scott throws a punch at Kang, but Kang stops him with his telekinesis.
What did you think you could do, Scott? I am infinitely more powerful than you.
True, Scott says. You are more powerful, and smarter, and slightly better looking, but I have something you don't.
Let me guess, Kang interjects. Your saving grace is the power of friendship?
Actually, yeah, Scott says. Now! Hope shoots Sting Blast at Kang's gauntlets, frying them. Scott is released from Kang's telekinesis and falls to the floor. Hope grows to normal size and says, Scott figured out your secret, Kang. You have no real powers. Scott stands up. After spending time with Iron Lad, I learned that Kangs get their power from their tech. All you are is a guy in a suit. And I've beaten guys in suits before. Kang growls. He flies into the air and cracks his knuckles. Hope flies into the air as well, and Scott grows, ready to fight. Cut back to Cassie, Hank, Janet, and Nathaniel fighting the androids. 10 of them fly up to Hank and start blasting him. Janet returns to normal size and shoots them down. Thanks, honey, Hank says. He grabs an android that was sneaking up on Janet from behind and crushes it. Nathaniel flies by, blasting androids from above, when he notices a few Kang androids are climbing up Cassie's leg. Hey, Cassie, Nathaniel says, your leg! Cassie looks down and sees the Kang androids. Let's see how they like this, she says. She grows taller, reaching 150 feet. One of the androids creates a large energy blade and slashes at Cassie's leg as it jumps off. Cassie cries out in pain and falls to her knees, crushing several more androids. Giant drops of blood drip from the gash in her leg, falling on more androids and destroying them. She stands up and stomps on the ground, creating a giant shockwave that blasts back dozens of the Kang androids. Nathaniel flies up to Cassie. I'm gonna try and fix the cut, he says. Don't move. He flies down to Cassie's leg and sprays a solvent on it that covers the gash in a gauze-like substance. The gauze starts to turn red with blood almost immediately. Your blood flows very fast, Nathaniel shouts. It's from a heart condition I've had since I was born, Cassie yells back. Are you done yet? Nathaniel sprays on an extra layer of gauze. You're good. Cassie slams her fist down on the ground, destroying a large group of androids. She then spots Scott and Hope fighting Kang. They need my help, Cassie says. You know, we could also use your help, Nathaniel replies. You guys can beat the androids, Cassie rebuts. My parents can't beat Kang on their own. Nathaniel concedes. You're right, we'll hold down the fort. Cassie nods, and suddenly she shrinks to 100 feet. What happened? Cassie asks. Your adrenaline has gone down a bit now that your cut is healing, Nathaniel explains. Remember those frequencies we practiced with. Cassie nods again, and she charges for her parents. Nathaniel flies over to Hank. Cassie's going to help Scott and Hope. You know, if you grew taller, we'd be able to beat these things more easily. I don't know, Hank says. I haven't used a suit in years. Being this big is already a lot. Janet flies up to them. I think you should try it, she says. Show them why you were called Giant Man. Hank smiles. He presses a button on his glove and grows to 45 feet. Hank laughs. It sounds almost crazy. Have I missed this feeling? He swipes his foot across the ground, destroying dozens of androids. Nathaniel and Janet resume their attack on the Kang androids as well. Cut back to Scott and Hope fighting Kang. Scott sees Cassie running toward them. Hope, when I say so, fly up into the air, he says. Hope nods and shoots Kang with sting blasts, but he dodges them. Hey, Kang! Cassie yells. Kang turns around. Now! Scott yells. Hope flies into the air and Scott jumps aside as Cassie slams her fist down on Kang. Cassie lifts up her fist and sees that Kang is gone. Kang teleports to Cassie's eye level. I must admit, Cassie, I'm rather impressed by how quickly you've mastered your abilities. Cassie claps her hands together on Kang, but he teleports away again. You're still going to die, of course. You're a bug, Kang, Cassie says, and I'm gonna crush you like one. Kang teleports behind Cassie. And here I thought Scott was the end. He hits Cassie with an energy blast and she falls to the ground. Scott and Hope narrowly avoid being crushed. Ow, Cassie groans. The real Kang's lasers hurt a lot more than the fake ones. Scott turns to Hope. I thought you broke his gauntlets, he says. Apparently not enough, she replies. Fools, Kang says. My technology repairs itself when compromised. I thought you would have recognized it, Scott. I borrowed the design from Iron Man's Mark 50 armor. Kang floats down and lands on Cassie's back. Right now, I am standing on the very center of Cassie's thoracic segment. He charges up an energy blast. Make one wrong move, and I paralyze her for life. Scott growls, but he and Hope ultimately surrender. Kang then shoots the supercharged energy blast at Hope. Just for good measure, he says. Hope goes flying back and lands on the ground, unconscious. Hope! Scott yells. Cassie wakes up and feels Kang standing on her back. Get off me! Cassie yells. She jumps up and Kang is launched into the sky. Kang steadies himself with his force field and floats in the air. Scott grows to 60 feet tall. You don't get to hurt my family, he says. Scott charges at Kang and starts punching his force field. Meanwhile, Cassie runs over to Hope and shrinks to normal size. Hope's suit is sparking and she's visibly injured. Are you okay? Hope gives Cassie one of her gloves. You need to overload Kang's force field, Hope manages. It'll take longer to repair.
Cassie nods and runs off. Hope activates her earpiece. Scott, she says. Hope, you're okay! Scott exclaims as he continues to bash Kang's force field. I need you to keep Kang in one place, Hope says. How am I supposed to do that? Scott asks. I don't know, Hope says, but figure it out. Cassie needs a clean shot to break through Kang's force field. Alright, I'll figure something out, Scott says. He wraps his hand around Kang's force field, but Kang teleports out. Kang lowers his force field and uses the energy to augment his fist as he punches Scott in the face. He then uses his telekinesis to press down on Scott's shrinking button, reducing him to normal size. Scott throws a punch at Kang, but Kang catches it. With his other hand, Scott quickly drops an ant on the back of Kang's shirt. Kang hits Scott with an energy blast, and Scott falls to the ground as Kang constructs a new force field. Guess what, Kang? Scott says. Turns out, I do have a superpower. Close-up magic! Scott presses a button on his belt, and the ant that he placed on Kang's back grows to supersize, pinning Kang to the ground. The ant kicks at Kang's belt, destroying his teleporter. Thanks, Antario, Scott says. Hey, Kang! Cassie's voice rings throughout the city. Kang turns and sees Cassie, 250 feet tall, charging up a giant-sized sting blast. Let's see how you like being shot with energy blasts! Cassie fires the giant sting blast. Scott shrinks to avoid the attack, which hits Kang and creates a massive explosion. The explosion spreads all the way to where Nathaniel, Hank, and Janet are fighting the androids. Nathaniel creates a force field, and Hank and Janet shrink to avoid getting destroyed by that discharge. We then see a shot from above, showing that the explosion left a massive crater in the floor. Scott returns to normal size. Where's Hope? He asks. Hope's fine, Cassie replies. She's on my shoulder. Cassie picks up Hope and puts her down on the floor, then shrinks back to normal size. Cassie gives Hope's glove back to her. Scott tackles Cassie in a hug. Cassie, that was amazing! He exclaims. Thanks, Dad, Cassie replies. Hank, Jenna, and Nathaniel come over.
That was incredible, Cassie, Hank says. You must have been over 200 feet tall.
That's probably the biggest I'm ever getting, Cassie says. Being that big really tired me out, and I feel like I want something sweet. Scott smiles. What you're craving is citrus. Oh my god, yes! Cassie agrees. Suddenly, the rubble behind them begins to shift, and Kang rises once more. His gauntlets, belt, and boots are broken, and his clothes are shredded, but he looks as confident as ever. You may think you've won, Kang says, but I can never die. I am eternal. I am everlasting. I am— Will you shut up? Janet shouts. She storms over to Kang and slaps him across the face. You brainwashed me with your false promises, Janet yells. I worked for you, bled for you, killed for you. You said you'd get me back to my family, you vile, worthless insect! She knees him in the crotch and kicks him to the ground. Scott sucks in a quick breath as Kang falls to the floor. Hank smiles. That's my wife, he says proudly. Janet walks back over to the other heroes. I just needed to get that off my chest, she says. I've been holding that in for years.
Would you like it if I got you a punching bag, honey?
Hank asks. Janet smiles. I'd love that. From behind them, Kang groans. The group turns around and sees Kang slowly getting up again.
You're going to wish I had killed you now,
he manages. He creates a portal and disappears through it. Should we go after him? Cassie asks. Scott shakes his head. Kang's been thoroughly defeated and humiliated. He's not coming back anytime soon. Janet pulls out her portal generator and gives it to Nathaniel. Please, take us home. Wait, are we not home? Scott asks. This is an alternate universe, San Francisco, Nathaniel explains. Oh, thank goodness, Scott says. Glad I don't have to deal with this. He gestures to the giant crater they're standing in. Nathaniel opens a portal to Earth 199999. Thank you, Spider-Verse.
Don't even get me started on Doctor Strange and the little nerd back on Earth 199999.
And Scott, Hope, Hank, and Janet go through. Cassie stops before entering the portal and turns to Nathaniel. Can you come with us? Cassie asks. Nathaniel shakes his head. Sorry, but I have to go back to my universe. Oh, Cassie says. Yeah, that makes sense. It's just that— Nathaniel cuts her off. We'll meet again, he says. I know where to find you. Cassie nods and heads through the portal back home. Nathaniel closes the portal to
Earth 199999
and opens a new portal to his home. He smiles. Huh. I am Iron Lad, he says to himself. He enters his portal, which closes behind him. Cut to back in Scott's house. Scott, Hope, Cassie, Hank, Jenna, and Luis are sitting around the table playing poker. Wow, I can't believe you guys did all that, Luis exclaims. Honestly, I can't believe it either, Scott says. He pushes all of his chips into the middle. I'm all in. Disclaimer, I don't play poker. If this is not how poker works, feel free to make fun of me in the comments. Scotty, you're crazy, man, Luis says. He folds, along with Hope, Hank, and Janet, but Cassie matches Scott's bet. Cassie, you do know we're playing for money, right? Hope asks. And isn't this, like, all of your savings? Scott adds, a smile spreading across his face. I know, and yes, Cassie replies, but I think I'm good. She reveals her hand. Boom! 4 of a kind! Scott laughs as he reveals his hand. Sorry, kid. Royal flush. What? Cassie cries. Scott moves all the chips in the pile towards him. I so thought I had that! Well, I guess you just have to get luckier, Scott says. He puts his arms behind his head, and a card falls out of his sleeve. Cassie's eyes narrow. What was that? She demands. Scott looks at the card that is now on the floor. Oh, you weren't supposed to see that.
You cheated! Cassie yells. I just spent all of my money, and you cheated!
As Cassie continues to berate her father, she begins to grow. She doesn't notice, but everyone else does. Cassie? Hope says.
What?
Cassie shouts. She then hits her head on the ceiling. Oh. Everyone starts laughing. You know what? How about everyone gets their money back? Scott says. Now everybody's happy. Cassie looks down at her feet. Dang it, she says. I just bought those shoes. Roll credits. Now it's time for the 2 end credit scenes, and while I'm fine leaving the second one, I'm changing the first one. Because, you know, if, hypothetically, an actor for a certain character was arrested for assault and harassment and is spending a year on probation and domestic violence counseling, you may not want to reveal that every variant of the multiverse is played by that actor. So, since hindsight is 2020, let's make a new mid-credit scene. The scene opens in the ex-con security office. Luis, Dave, and Kurt are sitting at their desks.
So then Cassie grows a giant size and hits Kang with a super bomb, Luis says, and then Kang gets back up, and Jenna kicks him in the balls, and man, that's gotta hurt, and Kang leaves. So then everyone goes back home, and we play poker, and Scotty cheats.
Course he does, Dave says. Classic Scott, Kurt agrees.
And this whole time, I'm kinda wondering if this is all some elaborate prank. Like, once I say I believe him, the hidden cameras will pop up, like, surprise! But then, when Scotty cheats and wins all of Cassie's money, she gets really mad, and she starts getting bigger, and she rips through a new pair of shoes, and she hits her head on the ceiling, and I'm like, holy crap, it's all real!
That's crazy, Dave says.
And you wanna know what the craziest part is? Luis says.
What is craziest part? Kurt asks.
They didn't invite me, Luis says. Cassie brought everybody else to see her crazy quantum gadgets and whatnot, but she didn't call me. I'm like an uncle to her, and she just forgot I existed.
That's shameful, man, Dave says, shaking his head.